there are 8 skills and mindset hacks that will get you ahead of 99% of entrepreneurs. I've worked with over 100 investors, entrepreneurs, and creators over the past 10 years, and over time it became clear that the best entrepreneurs had most, if not all, of these skills. You could learn these slowly over the years, or you could study them now and get light years ahead of your competition. But I'm not just going to explain each point, I'm also going to provide a practical tip on how you can learn the skill or adopt the mindset right now. Okay, this first skill helps you overcome one of the most brutal truths in business. This is that particularly when you start, no one cares about you or your business. They aren't emotionally or financially invested. So how do you get them to care? Well, you do this through sales and pitching, which when done best is storytelling. By creating a powerful story, you evoke emotion. This is the biggest factor in someone's decision to buy a product or service. In fact, according to a study published in the Journal of Consumer Research, consumers actually rely on emotion more than information when making brand decisions. Now, I'd say the most powerful storytelling founder of our time was Steve Jobs. He was a master of framing problems, building anticipation, and revealing the solution. And this usually came with a pre-order, but it was always met with huge rounds of cheers and applause. If you want to evoke a similar kind of reaction to your business, you need to start learning this skill now. When you watch presentations or talks that you like, try to think why. Look at their body language, their tone of voice, and their storytelling techniques. There are also books like Start With Why and Made to Stick, which teach you about storytelling. But like most things, the best way to get good is by doing it. So I recommend that everyone does some kind of sales role at one point in their career. And if you've got no experience, don't worry. You could offer to work for a company in business development, but on a commission-only basis. Companies are much more likely to give you a chance if you're free unless you make a sale. And this setup will allow you to hone this skill quickly. Now, talking of learning leads me to my next point, which is more of a mindset than a skill. I've seen this in all of the best entrepreneurs I've worked with, and it's absolutely essential. It's a willingness, and more than that, an excitement to learn new things. Bad leaders will delegate or outsource tasks they don't understand because they simply don't want to learn. Great leaders will make sure they understand at least enough to get the right person and the right output for every task. To do this, you need to be constantly learning and have what I call a curious mindset. You need to believe that you can learn anything, at least to a basic level. Whether you're in education or full-time work, constant learning has to be an intentional decision. And there are a couple of different ways that you can set yourself up to be constantly learning. Firstly, and stick with me for a second on this one, you need to steal the trick from toddlers. Yep, I know, but just think about a toddler for a second. When you tell them anything, you'll always get one response back. Why? They are constantly learning and they're curious about everything. Unfortunately, it's only too easy to lose that curiosity as we get older. When you learn new information, take the extra time to understand why that's the case. And alongside that, surround yourself by good information sources. For example, I love my Audible subscription. It gives me a credit for a book each month, which I use to learn about a new topic. You can also subscribe to newsletters on topics you find interesting. For example, if you want weekly tips on building online businesses, you could subscribe to my newsletter, the Digital Makers Club. The link's in the description. Now, if you're constantly learning, you're already going to be winning. But if you combine learning with this next mindset, that's when it becomes truly powerful. And it's another one I've noticed in every successful founder I've met. And even more interestingly, it's incredibly uncommon in people in normal jobs. And that is becoming comfortable with risk and failure. The simple fact is that learning by listening, reading, or watching is only half of the job. The fastest and most effective way of learning something is by doing it. Now, this has never been easier than it is today, thanks to the internet. You learn the basics of pretty much anything on YouTube. And most of the services you need have very cheap or free plans. So what stops people? Well, for most, it's the fear of failure. Humans are generally biased towards short-term gains. And when you combine that with the social and financial pressures attached to failure, it makes most people too scared to try anything new. But if great entrepreneurs of history had listened to this fear, they would not have succeeded. Henry Ford wouldn't have introduced the assembly line, which revolutionized the car industry. And Richard Branson wouldn't have gone into everything from music to space travel. Now, becoming comfortable with fear is hard. It's a really big topic that I'm going to cover in a dedicated video. But here's a quick tip that I've found useful. First, work out the actual risk of failure. I like to look at the most likely bad outcome and the worst case outcome. Then I consider if I'll regret trying it in 5 years' time, even if the worst case outcome happens. 90% of the time, the answer is no, which gives me the confidence to start. Now, let's talk about one of the most valuable practical skills that you can learn today. This skill is the basics of websites and marketing funnels. This won't be a surprise, but the most valuable businesses in the world are online businesses. So if you want to make as much money as possible, it makes sense to work in the most valuable space in the world. And to do that, you need to understand the basics of websites and marketing funnels so you can get started with your ideas yourself. I cannot tell you how many times someone has told me they have $1 million idea, but they just couldn't start it because they didn't know how. This is an excuse. It is not that complicated. It's easier than ever to buy a domain, set up a website, and start driving traffic to it. And if you learn how to do this yourself, you'll be able to start and test new business ideas at next to no cost. If you're serious about making money online, you should learn not only web basics, but also funnels. These are how people go from first hearing about your brand to actually purchasing. And once you understand funnels, it will transform the way you think about business. It's probably the single biggest driver in early sales in business businesses. In fact, most of Airbnb's early growth came from a referral program, supported by an email campaign. They might have never got that business off the ground if they didn't understand funnels. And as I've said earlier, the best way to learn is by doing it. And to make that easier, I'm going to release a video in the next couple of weeks to help with just that. So consider subscribing if you think that'd be useful. Now, I'm not going to lie, starting a business is hard. It will be stressful, and there is no getting around that. But what you can control is how you manage your stress, and managing it is essential, because stress leads to burnout. Arianna Huffington is the co-founder of the Huffington Post. She experienced such bad burnout that she founded a company to help reduce stress in the workplace. She even wrote a book about sleep prioritization called The Sleep Revolution. So how do you manage stress effectively? Well, it is a massive topic, but I'm going to focus on two things that you can do right now. Firstly, as Arianna talks about, prioritize your sleep. For me, this is the single most important factor in how I react to stressful situations. Being well rested helps you perform at your best. I even use this fitness tracker called a Whoop Band. It monitors my recovery and recommends an amount of sleep based on it. This helps me to know when to push myself and when to focus on recovery. The other way that everyone can get better at managing stress is even more interesting. There have been studies into the effectiveness of resilience training in improving stress management skills, particularly in high stress environments. One part of this is helping people to be self-aware of their emotional response to stress and adversity. When you feel stressed, try to understand why. And also try to remember that stressful situations aren't always something to run from. Most things worth doing are hard, which means they'll be stressful. Do the things that matter, and over time you'll become better and better at managing stress. Eventually you'll find that things that would have caused you to panic before don't bother you at all. Now, my next point also relates to stress and burnout, but is much more specific. And this has also single-handedly stopped me from burning out a couple of times in the past few years. And it's a simple change to your mindset. Throughout your career, you will at some point be asked to do something that you think is impossible. You'll look at it and go, it just can't be done. This response is a problem, and it's something you need to solve. Rather than saying it can't be done, ask how it can be done. Ultimately, a request is just a load of variables and a desired output. And usually some of those variables can change, or the output can change. I used to run into this all the time when clients wanted to build something that just wasn't possible in the time frame. I used to stress about this and feel defeated, but after changing this mindset, I'd attack each part of the request. Could I remove an unimportant feature and do it after launch? Could I push back the deadline? Could I simplify a feature to make it easier? As soon as I started thinking this way, I solved problems much more quickly, and as a result was much less stressed. This simple question is also a form of adaptive thinking and a coping strategy, which are also components of resilience training that I talked about earlier. For me, I literally wrote a post-it note that said, how can it be done? And I stuck it on my monitor until it was etched into my brain. And once it was, I was much happier and more productive for it. Now, my next point is one of the most overlooked and undervalued skills by entrepreneurs. And that's because, well, it's boring. But that doesn't mean it's not critical to the success of your business. This skill is basic accounting and finance principles. Now, to see how much this can impact your business, we can look at the founding story of McDonald's. Now, in case you don't know the story, the person who's considered the founder of McDonald's didn't invent the food, the brand, or even the name. What he did come up with was the financial model and property leases. These allowed the business to expand from one store to across the US and then across the globe. Today, the McDonald's Corporation owns 47,000 acres of land, and all because one guy came up with a better financial setup for a business that already existed. Now look, I'm not saying you need to get an accountancy degree or that you should ever not have an accountant. Seriously, get one. I learned that the hard way. But that's a story for another video. But learning the basics of business finances is critical. You need to understand the difference between personal and company tax and how director loans work, as well as basic accounting terms like the difference between gross and net profits. No accountant is going to make hard financial decisions for you because they don't want to assume the risk. Therefore, you need to understand what's best for your business financially. It's not the most exciting point, but it gives you a really unfair advantage if you're willing to learn it. You can learn all the basics here on YouTube. Just remember that every country is different, so make sure you look for videos in your country. And with that, we're on to our final point. And this skill and mindset has been present in every single successful founder I've ever worked with. Without it, you simply cannot run a business. The skills are reliability and accountability. You have to become someone who, if you tell someone you're going to do something, they know it will get done. Now I know, this is easier said than done. But for me, this became easier over the years with two major changes to my lifestyle. The first is creating a constructive environment through healthy habits. So that means making sure I have a calm place to work and looking after my health through my diet and regular exercise. I do find that whenever one of these slips, so does my reliability. Reliability and consistency are also behind one of the most successful investors of modern history, Warren Buffett. He has done the same routine every day for a couple of decades. And over time, that constant reliability and consistent drive has created one of the most successful funds ever. But the other side of this skill is setting boundaries and realistic expectations. You need to know what's unrealistic and set reasonable goals for yourself, as well as other people people who want things from you. And I've got 2 books that will help you make these lifestyle changes. It's Atomic Habits and Essentialism. There are links to everything I've mentioned in the description. Now, as I keep saying, the best way to learn and implement these skills is starting a business right now. And if you want to know what I think are the best ways of making money online right now, you can check out my video on that right here. Thank you so much for watching. I hope this was useful. Have a great day.